So, good morning. And in case anyone's here, I don't see anyone chiming into the chat. So, today I'm going to speak about the self. I've selected a few teachings. See if I can post them here. No. Good morning. I have Bhumika has come in. We have two people here that are short-term residents. And the live audience. So I was looking at the Dhammapada. This is a well-known. Manal has just come in. So maybe I'll wait another minute or two, because people sometimes maybe they're finishing their morning coffee or brushing their teeth or something. So people are coming in. Karuna has come in. So I have a Dhammapada verse and something from the connected discourses that I want to share, this concept of self. And when you hear about the Buddhist teaching, mostly you hear about non-self, anatta. And there's also atta. And there's this, the teachings mostly point towards, it seems like, anatta. This is one of the universal or characteristics, three characteristics of existence, of dukkha, which is often translated as suffering, anicca, which is usually translated as impermanence, and anatta, which is usually translated as non-self. And the atta is sometimes called a soul, the atman in Sanskrit, this concept of this something somewhere. We know there's this physical self, this physical form that we identify as self. So the teaching is often to look at the five aggregates and try to deconstruct this sense of self. But that may be, for most people, that may be kind of disturbing, because we do cling to this idea of some kind of essence or some kind of eternal self. And so most of us, this is too early in our development, our spiritual development. And it's one of the hallmarks of the Buddhist teaching, but it can be easily misunderstood how to proceed with this working with the anatta. But first, we have to understand atta, we have to understand self. And there's what's a conventional self. We can't deny that there's this existence, and there's nama rupa, where there's this physical form, and then what we're called, or what we call ourselves, and there's the mentality and the physical. There's a physicality, physical and mental. So that's a materiality and the mentality, but it's backwards. Nama is name or mental component, and rupa is the physical. So there's those two aspects that we can't deny exist. I mean, it could be very destabilizing if we don't really understand this concept of anatta. So there's a conventional self. So we're seeing more people coming in. Jayanta, and I'm sorry, this is a Wildlife Prevention Recovery Center, and I can't pronounce the name, maybe some kind of acronym. And Shadow, okay. Physiological self. Oh, someone is trying to prompt me with the correct English word for there's a physical self and the material. It's materiality and mentality, or mentality and materiality. Anyway, so that's nama rupa, and that's a conventional self. So we can't deny that there's something existing. There's some kind of conventional self that operates in the world and interacts with other beings, and particularly human beings that have an idea. And even I think even our cat, I think even Teddy has a sense of self somehow. And whenever I say cat or Teddy, he'll look in my direction, or I'll see some kind of reaction. So I think he has some kind of maybe nama as well. So other beings as well have some kind of sense. And in the Buddhist teaching, they talk about the self, and there's a beautiful teaching where King Pasenadi goes to his wife, and he says, "Darling, who do you hold most dear?" And then this is Queen Malika, and Queen Malika doesn't pause for a second. She says, "Oh, I hold myself most dear. How about you? Who do you hold most dear?" And then King Pasenadi's a little bit embarrassed, and he says, "Oh, yeah, I'm adding a little that emotional tone." But he says, "Yes, I hold myself most dear." And so he goes to Lord Buddha and he reports this to the Lord Buddha, and the Lord Buddha says, "Yes, I'm just paraphrasing. It's not exact translation." When he surveys the entire world and all beings hold themselves most dear. And therefore, one should understand that and not harm another being. So, because they hold themselves dear, they cherish their lives. So when we understand that, no one wants to be harmed, no one wants to be hurt in any way. So we should care for other beings and not cause harm. So there's this assumption, not assumption, but actually observation that the Lord Buddha made, just surveying the world and seeing this. And even though some people have an idea that they don't care for themselves, or they want to put other people above them and all this kind of stuff, there's still this self-care. In order to survive as an individual being, we have to care for ourselves. Who do we think of first when we're hungry, usually? Although a parent will look after the child and maybe sacrifice. Some people will sacrifice for others, but still that need, we understand that our own needs first. We'll experience hunger, we'll experience cold. And if we don't care for ourselves, we can't care for others. So there's another sutta in the same, that sutta I mentioned with the holding oneself dear is in the connected discourses. And I was actually trying to look it up this morning, and I found another one called dear. So I think in the Samyutta Nikaya the third collection of discourses, the third Samyutta is the Kosala Samyutta. And that's the king of Kosala is King Pasenadi. So this is conversations with the Lord Buddha and King Pasenadi, or something about King Pasenadi in this collection. So the one that I was mentioning, I didn't find. I found another one, which is also quite interesting. It's probably just right here. It's Malika. The one I was talking about is called Malika, and that's number 8. And the poem, the utterance that the Buddha makes is, having traversed all quarters with the mind, one finds none anywhere dearer than oneself. Likewise, each person holds him, herself, themself most dear. Hence, one who loves themselves should not harm another. So this other one, the King Pasenadi is by himself, and he's reflecting. And then he came to the Lord Buddha, and he says, "Here, Venerable Sir, while I was alone in seclusion," so the king was meditating, "a reflection arose in my mind thus: who now treats themselves as dear, and who treats themselves as a foe?" Then, Venerable Sir, it occurred to me, those who engage in misconduct of body, speech, and mind treat themselves as a foe, even though they may say, we regard ourselves as dear. And I looked this up, and it does use the word atta. So the atta and the piya is the dear, and atta is the self. And apiya is not dear. So we regard ourselves as dear. Still, they treat themselves as a foe. For what reason? Because of their own accord, they act towards themselves in the same way that a foe may act towards a foe. Therefore, they treat themselves as a foe. But those who engage in good conduct of body, speech, and mind treat themselves as dear. Even though they may say, we regard ourselves as foe, still they treat themselves as dear. For what reason? Because of their own accord, they act towards themselves in the same way that a dear person might act towards one who is dear. Therefore, they treat themselves as dear. So actions of body, speech, and mind, if we are harmful towards others, then we're harmful towards ourselves. They have misconduct of body, speech, and mind, so they're harming themselves. And good conduct is treating oneself as dear. And so the Lord Buddha says, so it is, great king, so it is, great king. If one regards oneself as dear, one should not yoke oneself to evil, for happiness is not easily gained by one who does a wrong deed. When one is seized by the end maker, as one discards the human state, what can one call truly one's own? What does one take when one goes? what follows one along like a shadow that never departs? Both the merits and the evil that a mortal does right here, this is what is truly one's own. This takes when one goes. This is what one follows one along like a shadow that never departs. Therefore, one should do what is good as a collection for future life. Merits are supports for living beings when they arise in another world. So he's talking about future births, but even in this lifetime, if we are causing harm, if we're misconduct through body, speech, and mind, then we're harming ourselves. And if we do good, cultivate good internally, good mental states, healthy mental states. So there's this idea of a self and holding oneself dear. And so we there's a conventional self that we're developing. In order to let go of the self, we have to have a strong, wholesome sense of self. And it might sound kind of contradictory, but it's not. It's actually, first we have to develop what is wholesome, and some kind of identity with that isn't bad. It's just kind of like, I've heard the simile of climbing a ladder. So when you're climbing a ladder, you have to, hang on. You might be hanging on to the upper rung, an upper rung, and your feet are firmly on each step, right? And as you progress upwards, then you can step up off of that previous step. But, you're not going to be able to get up, like if you're climbing up to a roof or something, it's impossible just to leap up. Like this would be, and then when you get up to the top, you get off the ladder and you're on the roof, right? So, but some people just want to jump to the roof. So the climbing up the ladder is like this, developing the self. And it's also that simile was used for the Noble Eightfold Path. So you transcend, then you completely transcend all of that. But first you have to develop. And just trying to figure out some other word for oneself, or just wanting to deny a self entirely when we haven't fully developed or understood self. And this is why you examine the aggregates. To see, okay, this body, for instance, when I remember my childhood, it's a different body. Even that's impermanent. Even that's, so how can I cling to it and then I know that eventually this body will be breaking apart. The at death, it just comes apart. So the body is the easy one to see as non-self, and then all the other mental components are more difficult. But we start examining those two in order to deconstruct the self. But first, we should understand the self and work on discarding the unwholesome qualities that we see arising. And this is also mentality. And so, to maybe use a word that maybe people might not like, but to identify with the wholesome and disidentify with the unwholesome. That's one way of looking at it. So it's okay to hold oneself as dear in the concept of self-care, rather than clinging or selfishness. Self-centeredness is not about self-centeredness, but it's developing a wholesome sense of self, wholesome qualities, a healthy self, before we can let go of the self. So what inspired me to talk about this morning is I was looking at the Dhammapada, and I opened up to the Attavagga, which is the chapter on the self. And I have Bhante Sujato's translation, and he likes the word love. I notice there's for metta, he says love. For piya, which is many people translate as dear, he translates as love. I kind of like the deer. And many people have used Ajahn Thanissaro uses the word dear, holding oneself dear. So I'll read Bhante Sujato's translation, and I'm going to just leave a little bit of time in between the verses for your reflection. We'll just take it slowly so you can just reflect on it. And then after that, we can open up for a conversation. If you'd only love yourself, you look after yourself right well. In one of the 3 night's watches, an astute person would remain alert. So in one of the night's 3 watches, an astute person would remain alert. If we hold ourselves dear. The astute would avoid being corrupted by grounding themselves first of all in what is suitable, and only then instructing others. If one acts as one instructs, the well-tamed would tame others, for the self is hard to tame, they say. Self is indeed the Lord of self, for who else would be one's Lord? When oneself is well tamed, one gains a Lord that is rare indeed. For the evil that one does, born and produced in oneself, grinds down a fool as a diamond grinds a lesser gem. One choked by immorality as a saul tree by a creeper does to themselves what a foe only wishes. It's easy to do bad things, harmful to oneself, but good things that are helpful are the hardest things to do. on account of wicked views, scorning the guidance of the perfected ones, the noble ones living righteously, the idiot begets their own demise, like the bamboo bearing fruit. For it is by oneself that evil is done. One is corrupted by oneself. It's by oneself that evil is not done. One is purified by oneself. Purity and impurity are personal matters. No one can purify another. Never neglect your own good for the sake of another, however great. Knowing well what's good for you, be intent upon your true goal. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So, just wanted to read Ajahn Tanisro's, let's see, the first part of this, because it's kind of an interesting, and the commentaries support how he's translated this. It says, if you hold yourself dear, then guard yourself well. The wise person would stay awake, nursing himself in all of the 3 watches of the night, the 3 stages of life. First, he'd settle himself in what is correct. Only then teach others. He wouldn't stain his name. He is wise. If you'd mold yourself the way you teach others, then, well trained, go ahead and tame. For as they say, what's hard to tame is yourself. So I thought I'd stop there because it seems like a good stopping place to consider taming oneself.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.
So the self is hard to tame. So this is our path to start out with in the gradual training. They talk about, there's a lot of metaphors of horses and elephants being trained or tamed. And there's a beautiful simile of a team of horses. And if you have a well-tamed team of horses on your chariot or your carriage, then you're also an excellent horse trainer. Then you can go anywhere with the horses, where horses are able to go. But anyway, the idea is that they work as a team. So we kind of internalize the positive qualities of ourselves that work together rather than against ourselves. So that's quite beautiful. But it takes effort. It's just, it's easier to fall into unwholesome habits, is what the sutta or the verses were saying in the Dhammapada. So we have to be careful not just to get into our old bad habits. So let me see if there's any questions here. I've seen a few new people have come in. And if I can get this to scroll up. Good morning to everyone. Okay, John Manash. Oops, I hit one by mistake. Usha P. Anata. You might have seen the cat's tail. He was on my lap for a while, and now he's departed. And Leal, I hope I'm pronouncing your name, Leal. And there's looks like, I'm not sure what script that is. I don't want to venture because I don't want to hurt anybody's feeling. It's a foreign script that I can't read. Chani, and there's another foreign script that I can't read. So hello to everyone. And Rampal, Gita. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Let's see. Let me look. I thought I might have seen. Okay, that's not a question. Okay. Let's see if this is a question. Okay, I don't see any questions so far. Just comments. I'd like to just stick with the content of what we just were looking at. And you had a question, it looks like.
Yeah, I was just curious. So, when one practices metta bhavana, right? One in that moment, in that session, one is being virtuous with their body, their speech. Well, they're cultivating, I guess, wholesome fabrications of mind, body, and speech. And in that moment, they are completely harmless and benefiting everyone. And that is to be understood. So when we sit down, we should be joyful that we're practicing metta bhavana, because when we rejoice in anyone else around us who also might be practicing, because in that moment they're completely virtuous. Is that how one should see the practice?
I don't know if everyone heard that. He's asking about the practice of seated metta bhavana, when we're sitting still and we're bringing up thoughts of kindness towards, usually some instructors say to start with oneself, but if you're, and by the time you get to all beings as well. So there is a virtuous conduct, and we can rejoice in that. He's asking if that should be rejoiced in. So this is, so to bring up the joy part, one of the hallmarks of the metta bhavana is to be feeling joy, and you're extending that joy out to all beings eventually, but you're generating a sense of joy internally, and then it can extend outwardly. But while we're sitting, if we're not harming anybody, and we're not making any sound with our mouth, and we're not doing anything offensive verbally. So this is restraining from any kind of harm, you could say. So that it is virtuous, and the internal, the vaci sankhara, the internal verbal formation, that's also wholesome. It's a wholesome verbal formation internally. So bodily, verbally, mentally, it's all wholesome. It's a conduct. It's the Buddha talks about, or in the Buddhist teaching, they talk about action or conduct through body, speech, and mind. So even though we think, oh, if I have all this anger and resentment towards, it's just my own business, but we're actually harming ourselves, and then other people can feel it. So it's the same with the metta bhavana. I think that there are people that are sensitive to that, and then I've heard repeatedly from people who, there's a request because they're sick or they're going through a hard time, even if they're just knowing that other people are thinking of them, that has an impact on them. And there's been studies with prayer where they had divided patients in the hospital randomly, like even and odd or something like that, patient numbers, in a hospital ward. And then half of the patients, people were given their name. They didn't know the people, but they were given the person's name, and the people were praying for those people. And the other ones there weren't getting any prayers for. And so they didn't know. It was a blind study where the patients that were having the prayers for them didn't know. And the recovery rate for the people that were being prayed for was higher. So even though the people didn't know, so the mind is powerful. So this is a wholesome mental state that we're cultivating. So we're benefiting ourselves, or starting with ourselves, because it's going to be most powerful experience when we're generating this loving kindness and the joy, reflecting on the goodness of it. So we're benefiting ourselves, and when we're a happier person in the world, we're better to be around people. I would rather be around somebody that's happy than somebody that's grouchy, So yeah, so that's a good point. When we're sitting in meditation and any kind of sitting that we're doing, at least we're keeping ourselves out of mischief. At the very least, we're keeping our mouth shut. Usually, in most of our meditation practice, we're silent, and if we're chanting, hopefully we're chanting something wholesome. We're directing good thoughts and caring or veneration or respect. This is bringing up a wholesome mind state, as well as having a verbal expression of something. Let's see. I don't see any further questions here. Everybody's happy with this idea of cultivating a wholesome sense of self and caring for oneself in the right way through conduct of body, speech, and mind, which is beneficial, wholesome. Let's see. Oh, there's a question about some books. And I'm not going to show it. It's a long, well, here it is. We need some books for the PhD and books by Rise David. So that, if you go to Polytext Society, they've published Rise David, and it's an older publication. So that would be the source. And I don't know D.D. Kosambi. But Polytext Society has Rise David's translations of Buddhist texts. So, anything else? So there's a question that just arose. Excuse me. I'm just going to change positions here. Okay. Okay. That says, since the goal is Cheto, one's own mind, liberation, Cheto Vimutti, I think is what you're, and liberation by understanding, Vipanya Vimutti. And this is done by stopping sankharas of volitionality or volitionally produced due to ignorance. Then is the self to be tamed, the vets. I'm not sure what that means by the vets. Let's see. Did I get it all? No. The self to be tamed. Well, understanding the self, and I think there's that gradual process, especially there's a lot of emphasis on the body. And liberation by understanding, stopping the sankharas. So there's volitionality, but volition, sankharas. Sankhara is a complex word in different contexts. It has different meaning. So there's it's sometimes translated as volition, is that aspect of the mind, volitional formations. There's a lot of different ways it's translated. Bhante Sujato says choices, but I think that's too limited. There is an aspect of that when you're thinking of karma. So it's just you do start with understanding the conventional self and taming the conventional self and observing the sankharas, so observing volition. I like the word volition because or will is that's Ajahn Brahmali translates it willed activities. So willed activities of body, speech, and mind could be sankhara. So understanding is very important. Like if I understand this strong volition, which is unwholesome, I could see the strong desire arising in me, and then there's this impulse to do something, to take something, to get something for myself, to strike out something. So I started examining these impulses, and what's beautiful about the sitting meditation is we can observe these things arising in our minds. There's like I'd be sitting and I'd be thinking about doing something or saying something to somebody, and then I realized that was influenced by something that happened earlier in the day, and I'm still processing it. It's arising in me. And there's something I want. I want some kind of outcome. I want to change something. I want to get something. So I can look at, oh, okay, the unrest in my mind, even though it doesn't even, it could be like a subtle thoughts, even. Like I was trying to rearrange files in my, like my drive in my mind. I was like, how can I do that? And I was like, it was because I was having a little frustration finding something earlier in the day. And so, but that's still, it's, I'm away from my meditation object, and there's some unrest in my mind. It's not, it's not like I want to get something or get at someone or something, but even as a little subtle things in the mind. So we're observing the volition, we're observing that, and seeing how the mind is unsettled by that. And then the willingness just to let it go. Okay, I see it arising and I can set it down. The earlier I see it, the less likely I'll get entangled. We get entangled in our thoughts the more they develop. So so understanding this conventional self, yeah. I don't know, but to be vets, I'm not sure, vets with a backslash, I'm not sure what that's referring to. But yeah, so we can see the craving certainly is very apparent. Ignorance is harder to see. So by deconstructing the self and seeing the transientness of the self, and understanding the craving and understanding how the craving is fueling often negative volitional formations, then we're also the antidote to ignorance is understanding, is wisdom. So if we're developing wisdom, then we may not quite see the ignorance itself, but as we develop wisdom, we'll start unraveling the ignorance. And some of the teachings of the Buddha are hard to understand, and we have to kind of take it so-called on faith or trust. We're confident enough in the Buddhist teaching because there's enough of it that's worked well for us. So there's some of it that we don't quite understand, but we need to understand it for ourselves, and that takes time. So if we examine the sankharas, we can't stop them entirely. There's going to be some kind of, until parinibbana, there'll be some volition. This is my understanding of it. I'm not an arhat, so I can't. But I have a very strong belief that this is so. So anyway, I think that's all I can say about that. I hope that was helpful. Here's another question. It's a briefer one. How to stop thinking and act wisely. So I don't think it's a good idea to entirely stop thinking. We have to think wisely so we can act wisely. So there's times when there's a lot of spaciousness in the mind, and there's a like I've noticed sometimes I'm walking around throughout the day, and then I'm just walking. There's nothing arising in my mind as far as like verbal thoughts, but I still have an intention to go where I'm going. I still have this something in some place in mind that I'm going, right? I'm not just kind of mechanically walking, anywhere. And so, but I do notice there's times when the mind is quiet. But there was that thought, I will go to the meditation hall. I will go to the kitchen or something. I need to speak to the venerable so-and-so. So then I think you may be talking about the kind of thinking where you're just, it's papancha, we're just ruminating and there's lots and lots of thoughts. And if you're on the cushion, the idea is that the mind is going to be silent somehow. And we'll just stay with the breath the entire time. And I'm laughing because that's not so easy to do. Like that in the Dhammapada verses, it says that it's hard to do. These things, that what's good is hard to do. Taming the mind is difficult to do. So if we it takes time and patience. So a lot of it is observing what's going on and being kind to ourselves and realizing we've gone off the path. We've lost our object of meditation. So if we're seeking a kind of deep silence of mind, if we're averse to what's going on, we're going to have, this is a different kind of volition. So here's these thoughts that are kind of floating along, and then there's like, no, this has to stop. And so there's like, no. And then there's no, and then it sneaks up somewhere else, And so before we know it, we're just like in conflict with ourselves, or we're thinking about something even less wholesome because we're starting to bring up aversion to our own thoughts. And we had this conversation here at the monastery, is that, this unwholesome mental state has arisen. Like suddenly anger has risen in my mind. There's a memory, and suddenly, I'm just so mad. And then, there's anger. A lot of times I just say, oh my goodness, there's anger. And I know it's dangerous. It's like suddenly there's a flame coming up, a big bonfire or something. But taking interest, what can be done? What should be done? I got some training in I worked in a hospital, and we had training if there's like a small fire, what we could do. So, and we watched all these videos of some scenarios or something. And there was a fire in a garbage bin, and then someone just put a lid on and that sounds contradicting to what I had to say, but I can contain it. And the fire is still burning inside there, but it's gonna smolder out, right? But let's say we're outside and there's a fire in the it's in a fire ring, but we're walking through the forest and we see somebody has left the fire in the fire ring, and we say, oh, that's dangerous. So this is like so then I can scatter. One of the things that you do is you scatter the things that are burning, and then they'll burn out. But taking an interest, look at that. There's anger. Oh, look at that. There's greed. Not sometimes just labeling it, identifying what it is, and then there was this idea of an interest too. Rather than saying, no, this shouldn't be happening, like I was like thinking, oh, I'm in my mind, I'm rearranging my files. What? That's strange. And then I go, oh, right, that's happened because that, what I was doing earlier. And so just kind of like, okay, I'm aware that there's an impact of what I'm doing before I sit down for meditation. So, but those kind of things are easy to let go of. Strong emotions, I think, take a little bit of effort, but we have to, instead of aversion, saying, no, I'm a good person, I'm not supposed to be having these thoughts. It's like, wow, that little bit of a trigger of that memory brought up such a strong emotion. It's actually kind of dangerous, but it's amazing. This is amazing. This is kind of interesting. And then we're observing it rather than diving into it and burning ourselves. We're not, or just letting the fire completely get, well, let's put more fuel in the fire. And that so-and-so did this. And then they said that. And why don't they have to treat me that way? And I'm putting big logs on the fire and making this big bonfire. No. So there's a difference between just observing and letting it burn out, but containing it. Not giving it more fuel. Putting the lid on the garbage can is like oxygen is fuel. So you're depriving the fire of oxygen, or scattering it is like, or just, oh, okay, these embers are still quite active. This area here is burning out. And so we're observing, okay, it's dying down. Okay, so I think stopping is not, so thinking wisely helps us act wisely. So once we've made a determination to have kind, gentle, and introspective kind of thinking, then we're more likely to act wisely. And then we also, before we speak or act, say, is this helpful or harmful? And if it's harmful, we refrain from it. If it's helpful, we can go ahead. Let's see. Okay. So there's this and the last question, which is already 10, but I'll take a little bit of time about it. I can't give as much time as it maybe deserves. The texts say after the first jhana, there are no more directed thoughts and evaluation. So this will cease the thought process temporarily, at least. However, perception goes on. What is your take on it? Yeah, so the vitaka, vichara, the directed, it's called thought, vitaka. So there's a time when the verbal formations that we recognize as thinking will cease, and that even before the first jhana, that will settle down. You can have times of space and time where you're just there with the breath or your object of meditation. If you have a visual object, your mind can settle and be quiet and not have words thinking. And the directed thought and sustained thought is like Ayyā Suvijjānā has a different ways applying the mind to the object and staying with it. And so so you should have some perception and in terms of awareness, being aware of what's going on, even though there are no verbal formations and the words. There's no words going on. There's no that kind of thinking. There's still awareness. And that doesn't have to happen in the jhanas. But I think so they will stop temporarily. The thinking and the mind becomes more unified and still, and there's not any effort to stay. There's no, they call it a wobble of the mind. There's, in the first jhana, there's what they describe as a wobble, where the mind is still. It's easier to fall out of the first jhana because it's easier to go out towards the sense and the five sense stimulation. But the mind is coming more and more into unity and stillness. So, yes, but well, in our everyday world, we will have a need, some amount of verbal formation. It's not entirely bad. What we have to do is, develop the wholesome states, which will support the wholesome verbal formations as they're needed. If they're not needed, then the mind can rest in just awareness of the present moment. And then in jhana, more still states of mind. But that's all I really have time for right now. I hope that is answering what you were getting at. So I thank you all for your kind attention and wishing you all well and taking the best care of yourself as instructed by the Lord Buddha. So take care, everyone. And we can bow to the Buddha. If you have an image of the Buddha, you can bow to the Buddha, or you can bow towards the screen if you don't have one. Have a wonderful day, everyone.